He was the largest battleship of his time and immobilized the entire enemy fleet in a chase that marked modern naval history. To this day, the name Bismarck is the one most closely associated with the history of the Kriegsmarine in World War I, and the story of this battleship was as short as it was full of excitement. On June 18, 1935, a German delegation in London signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, a document that established that the Kriegsmarine could grow but never exceed 35% of the size of the Royal Navy. The German intention was to start an Anglo-German alliance against the Soviet Union, but the British signed the document only in the hope of containing German armament expansionism. In any case, the agreement gave Hitler the expected green light to begin the expansion and modernization of his navy, since the British approval had overridden the terms established in the Treaty of Versailles, effectively exempting Germany from continuing to comply with it. The signing of the agreement allowed Germany to join the naval construction system established by the Washington Treaty, which permitted the construction of battleships of up to 35,000 tons. In 1935, Italy announced the construction of 2 Littorio-class battleships, which would have a set maximum weight, and France did the same, announcing its Richelieu class. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, commander of the Kriegsmarine, wasted no time in exploring the new possibilities, and he accelerated the planning that had already been secretly developed for his new class of large battleships. However, Raeder and the German admirals had even bigger plans, and the 2 new ships were secretly designed to greatly exceed the international weight limitations. The 2 new battleships would be named Bismarck and Tirpitz, in honor of the former chancellor and main figure of German unification, Otto von Bismarck. Grand Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz led and expanded the Imperial German Navy. The contract for building the Bismarck was awarded to the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg, which laid its keel on July 1, 1936. In agreement with Adolf Hitler, Raeder had decided on the installation of the main armament, consisting of 4 twin turrets with 380mm guns, featuring 12 150mm and 16 105mm guns, plus extensive anti-aircraft defenses with 16 37mm and 12 20mm cannons. To accommodate this vast floating arsenal, the Bismarck was designed with a length of 251 meters and a beam of 36 meters, also featuring a draft of 9.9 meters. Its armored belt had a thickness of about 32 centimeters of steel, and it was propelled by a set of 3 steam turbines and 12 oil-fired boilers that generated the power. To reach a maximum speed of 30 knots or 55.5 kilometers per hour. The Bismarck was also equipped with 4 Arado R-196 reconnaissance seaplanes, 2 stored in a double hangar amidships, and the other 2 in separate hangars. On either side of the funnel, the planes were launched by a bidirectional transverse catapult mounted just behind the funnel. The ship was also equipped with the most modern naval instrumentation of the time, including 3 Seetakt radars, which could locate naval targets within a range of up to 19 kilometers, mounted on the forward and aft rangefinders, as well as on top of the command tower. The Bismarck's standard crew included 103 officers and 1,962 enlisted men organized into 12 divisions. This included 6 divisions solely for operating the armament, 1 for ordnance, 1 for supply, 1 for communications, and 3 for engine operations. To accommodate all of this, the Bismarck ended up with a nominal weight of 41,700 tons, and when fully loaded, 50,300 tons, becoming the European battleship with the greatest displacement of its time. Erich Raeder didn't have to hide his secret for long, since in 1937 Japan left the Washington Treaty to build its Yamato-class super battleships, causing the other powers to invoke the escalation clause that allowed them to exceed 35,000 tons. With extreme pomp and the presence of the entire High Command of the Third Reich. The Kriegsmarine launched its new pride of the fleet on February 14, 1939, with the ship being christened by Dorothea von Löwenfeld, granddaughter of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Once in the water, the ship received its superstructure and armament, including the 4 main turrets, the forward ones, Anton and Bruno, and the aft ones, Caesar and Dora. With the Second World War beginning in September of that year, Bismarck's anchorage became protected against enemy bombers, but no attack damaged it while its construction was being completed. With the ship almost finished, it was now time to decide who would be the officer to command it, and Hayter made a bold choice for such a prestigious position. The command of the Bismarck was given to Captain Sorze Ernst Lindemann, an officer who had never commanded a battleship before, but who was an experienced veteran of World War I and the Spanish Civil War, as well as the greatest German expert in naval artillery. With this choice, the Kriegsmarine made it clear that it intended to make full use of its new and gigantic weapons platform. The new Kriegsmarine ship, Bismarck, was finally commissioned into the Kriegsmarine on August 24, 1940, and was immediately taken by Lindemann for tests in the Baltic Sea, where the ship, impressed by exceeding its design speed, and proved to be a very stable gun platform. However, a design flaw was quickly discovered. It was observed that when the ship was maneuvered only by changing the power of its 3 propellers, without using the 2 rudders, Bismarck became unstable and could only be kept on course with great effort. With the tests lasting until December, Bismarck returned to Hamburg for a final round of upgrades before heading to the Kiel naval base. But it was prevented by the winter's bad weather and by a shipwreck at the entrance to the port, which took a long time to be removed. And the ship only anchored in Kiel on March 9, 1941. Meanwhile, the Kriegsmarine was carrying out the successful Operation Berlin in the Atlantic Arc, having set sail from Kiel on January 22 with its 2 modern battle cruisers, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, crossing the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland to attack Allied convoys crossing the ocean. On board the Gneisenau was the bold commander of the Kriegsmarine surface fleet, Admiral Günther Lichens, who led the 2 large ships. In a successful 60-day campaign that resulted in the sinking or capture of 22 enemy ships. On March 22nd, after sailing 29,000 kilometers, the 2 ships safely docked in occupied France, and Lichens had his prestige catapulted by the German press. The Navy now wanted to capitalize on this success, drastically raising the stakes. The initial planning of what would become Operation Rheinbong, or the Rhine exercise. It involved the use of the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, together with the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau, but delays in the completion of the Tirpitz quickly took it off the list. To make matters worse, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had to undergo major repairs after Operation Berlin, and would not be available in time either. The only ship capable of accompanying Bismarck on the new venture would be the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, also recently commissioned into the Kriegsmarine. On April 26th, even after Lichens suggested delaying the advance to allow more ships to participate, Raeder decided that the operation should be launched immediately to prevent the enemy from gaining any advantage. While in Kiel, the Bismarck was visited by Captain Anders Forshaw, Swedish naval attaché in Berlin. He went back to Stockholm and described the ship in detail. The document was leaked to the British by Anglophile elements in the upper command of the Swedish Navy, becoming the first detailed report on Bismarck to reach London. On May 5th, Hitler visited the ship, discussing with Lichens the prospect of the future mission. 11 days later, the admiral stated that the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen were ready and equipped, awaiting orders to set sail. The Bismarck's crew for Operation Rheinbong rose to a total of 2,221 sailors, with an addition of 65 men from Admiral Lichens' staff, including the Fregatten Kapitän, Paul Asher, who had been the artillery officer of the Graf Spee in the Battle of the River Plate, and who had managed to return to Germany after months of internment in Argentina. The ship also carried 80 extra sailors to serve as crew in case they captured enemy vessels during the mission. At 2 in the morning on May 19th, the Bismarck set sail from Gotenhafen and passed through the Danish Straits, being inadvertently observed by English informants, who reported its position to the Admiralty in London. By nightfall the next day, the ships reached the Norwegian coast, heading north along the shoreline, arriving in Bergen at noon on the 21st. It was there that a Spitfire managed to photograph the Bismarck and its escort. Informing the commander of the English fleet, Admiral Sir John Tovey, who immediately sent the battlecruiser His Majesty's Ship Hood, along with the brand new battleship His Majesty's Ship Prince of Wales, to properly patrol the Greenland Passage, expecting the Germans to retrace their January route. During his stop in Bergen, Leekens confided to his colleague, Admiral Wilhelm Marshall, that he saw no hope of survival. Marshall advised him not to strictly follow Raeder's orders, but Leekens was determined to go ahead with the orders he had received. Leekens' uncompromising attitude was repeated, with Captain Ernst Lindemann and Helmut Brinkmann, commander of the Prinz Eugen. The lack of communication with the two captains marked the entire mission, leaving them nervous about the admiral's silence. At 7:30 that evening, the ships left Bergen and headed for the Arctic. And near midnight, Admiral Hyder finally informed Adolf Hitler about the operation, which until then had been kept completely secret. Hitler only reluctantly and finally gave his approval for it to go ahead. The next day, Leekens received information from the Luftwaffe that 4 battleships and an aircraft carrier were still anchored at the Royal Navy's naval base in Scapa Flow, which gave him the certainty that he had not yet been spotted. Leekens once again came into conflict with his captains, ordering the crossing through the farthest passage by Greenland instead of the shorter route between Scotland and Iceland, preferred by Lindemann. Lindemann believed that the shorter route would surprise the British, but Leekens insisted, saying that the fog in Greenland would provide cover, thus making up for the extra distance. At 4 in the morning on May 23rd, Leekens ordered the ships to increase speed to 27 knots or 50 kilometers per hour to make the crossing of the Denmark Strait, and the two ships activated their radars as they entered the area. At 19:22, the Germans' radar detected the presence of the cruiser His Majesty's Ship Suffolk, following them at 12,500 meters, and a listening team aboard the Prinz Eugen discovered that the Suffolk was transmitting the ship's position. At 20:30, the heavy cruiser Norfolk joined the Suffolk and boldly approached the German flotilla. The Bismarck responded by opening fire with 5 salvos from its main guns, hitting the Norfolk with shrapnel, causing the cruiser to quickly turn around and increase the distance. At 2200 hours, Leekens ordered a 180-degree turn in the darkness to surprise the English cruisers, but Suffolk's radar spotted the maneuver and the enemy ships fled once again. During the early morning, Norfolk and Suffolk followed Bismarck from a distance, continuously reporting its position to Admiral Tovey. At 5:07 in the morning on May 24th, the hydrophone operators on Prinz Eugen detected the sound of 2 large ships approaching from the east 37 kilometers away, and at 5:45, 2 smoke trails were spotted on the horizon, belonging to the force commanded by Admiral Lancelot Holland, consisting of Hood and Prince of Wales. At 5:52, Hood opened fire at 26 kilometers, followed by Prince of Wales a minute later. Korvettenkapitan Adalbert Schneider, Bismarck's first gunnery officer, requested permission to return fire, but Leekens hesitated. Furious, Lindemann intervened and told the admiral, "I'm not going to let my ship be destroyed right under my nose." Reluctantly, Leekens authorized the opening of fire at 17:55. The English ships were approaching head-on, unable to use their rear turrets, but the Germans were able to use the firepower of all their weapons against their opponents, focusing on the Hood. After a minute, Prinz Eugen was the first to score a hit with its 203mm guns, starting a fire on the Hood. After 3 salvos, Schneider locked the range on the Hood and ordered rapid salvos from his 4 turrets. While Holland was making a 20-degree turn to bring his ships parallel to the Germans, Leekens ordered Prince Eugen to switch targets to the Prince of Wales to keep both enemies under fire. At the same time, Bismarck's secondary batteries were also targeting the ship. At 6 in the morning, while Hood was completing her maneuver to come alongside, Bismarck's 5th salvo scored a direct hit on the ship, penetrating her deck and entering the aft magazine, where it detonated. 112 tons of explosives were stored there. A monstrous explosion broke Hood in half, with her forward section briefly remaining afloat before stopping and pointing upward, then quickly sinking. In just 8 minutes, Hood disappeared, leaving only 3 of her 1,419 crew members alive. An exuberant Schneider announced the sinking over Bismarck's loudspeakers, which quickly turned its turrets toward the Prince of Wales. Incredibly, Bismarck hit the British battleship with its very first salvo, with a shell passing through the command bridge, killing everyone present except the captain and another officer. Despite the monumental damage, the Prince of Wales landed 3 salvos on Bismarck, causing flooding in some compartments. At 1813, the Prince of Wales retreated, protected by a smokescreen. Lindemann advocated pursuing the ship to destroy it, but Leekens rejected the suggestion and ordered them to continue on the prescribed route to the Atlantic. After the action, receiving the damage report from the Bismarck, which reported a 9-degree list to port and a large trail of oil leaking from the ship, Leekens reported to Berlin his decision to split his force, sending the Prince Eugen to attack the convoys and proceeding with the Bismarck to Saint-Nazaire on the French coast, where repairs would be carried out. Admiral Sir Frederick Wake Walker, commander of the force that included the cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk. In addition to the damaged battleship Prince of Wales, he continued to follow the Bismarck from a distance. Meanwhile, an enraged Winston Churchill, upon learning of the sinking of the Hood, ordered all warships in the area to join forces, Pursuit issuing his famous order, "Sink the Bismarck." Sir John Tovey was already at sea, aboard the new battleship King George V, and the battleship Rodney, which was on an escort mission to Canada, quickly turned around and headed towards the Bismarck. In total, 6 battleships and battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers were sent out for the hunt. At 6:14, Leekens finally gave the order for the Prince Eugen to break away and turned around to confront Wake Walker's cruisers to allow the ship to escape. Having temporarily driven off the British, the Bismarck continued toward France, still making a speed of 28 knots, faster than the British battleships. If it kept going like this, the Royal Navy would have no chance of catching up. A few hours earlier, Tovey had sent the aircraft carrier Victorious ahead so it could get into position to launch its torpedo bombers against the Bismarck. At 2209, Ferry Swordfish from the 825th Naval Air Squadron took off, but their attack had been spotted by the defenders of the Bismarck. A wall of anti-aircraft fire lit up the night, and the Bismarck's main batteries fired at maximum depression to create gigantic walls of water in front of the fragile biplanes. Although no plane was shot down, the ship dodged 8 of the torpedoes, but the last one hit it squarely on the armored belt, causing minor damage to the electrical system. Meanwhile, Wake Walker's ships were forced to zigzag to avoid a U-boat threat in the area. This gave Bismarck an advantage, allowing it to disappear from their radar. The hunt started to become desperate on the 25th because many of the ships were running low on fuel, and Force H, commanded by Admiral Sir James Somerville, aboard the battlecruiser Renown, had set sail from Gibraltar with the aircraft carrier Ark Royal and the cruiser Sheffield. But Leekens made the mistake of breaking in, sending constant radio messages to the Navy High Command, and those messages were deciphered at Bletchley Park, giving the British the position of the German ship. At 10:30 on May 26th, a Catalina from the Royal Air Force Coastal Command spotted the Bismarck 280 kilometers northwest of Brest. a distance that would put it within range of Luftwaffe cover in less than a day. The only hope of stopping the ship in time was the torpedo bombers from the Ark Royal, which was approaching from the south. At 19:10:15, Swordfish took off towards the German ship, which was already being observed from a distance by the cruiser Sheffield. Once again, greeted by a storm of anti-aircraft fire, 13 of the Swordfish missed the target, with only one torpedo hitting the ship on the starboard side, exploding next to the armored belt. But at 21:05, the Swordfish, piloted by Lieutenant John Moffat, bravely approached through the German tracers. He launched his torpedo at the Bismarck's starboard stern, exploding by the left rudder and jamming it in a 12-degree starboard turn. The Bismarck then became uncontrollable, trapped in a continuous turn that took it further away from the safety of the French coast. At 21:40, Likens radioed the grim message, "Ship uncontrollable. We will fight until the last salvo. Long live the Führer." That night, as Tovey's force approached from the north, a group of destroyers harassed the dying Bismarck, keeping it illuminated with flares throughout the early morning. In the early morning of the 27th, the crew tried to launch one of the plows with the ship's logs and footage of the sinking of the Hood, but they realized that the catapult had been damaged by the fighting, and the plane was simply pushed into the water. At 20:43, the lookouts on King George V spotted the Bismarck 23 kilometers away, and 4 minutes later the ship opened fire, accompanied by the battleship Rodney. At 20:50, the Bismarck returned fire, but its ability to aim accurately had been nullified by the ship's erratic course. Surrounded, the Bismarck also came under fire from the 8-inch turrets of the heavy cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire at ever-decreasing range, until at 9:02 in the morning, a 16-inch shell from the Rodney scored a direct hit on the German battleship's command bridge, killing Admiral Lutyens and Captain Schneider and seriously wounding Captain Lindemann. Lieutenant Burkhardt Pfeiffer Mielenheim Heschberg, the 4th gunnery officer, took command of the already decrepit gun turrets of the Bismarck, firing the last salvos at 9:27. Amidst the despair and numerous fires immediately on board the Bismarck, frigate Captain Hans Urs took command of the ship and ordered the scuttling of the battleship to prevent its capture. While the demolition charges were being set, the crew took refuge on the deck, with hundreds of men falling victim to the intense fire. Armor of the British battleships. The charges detonated at 10:20, and 15 minutes later the ship was already listing heavily to starboard. Tovey ordered the battleships to withdraw, and the cruiser Dorsetshire to finish the attack by firing 2 torpedoes at the German ship, which already had water on its deck. The Bismarck was now a shapeless, smoldering wreck, but its battle flag was still flying on the mast. Survivors say they saw at that moment Captain Lindemann wounded and standing at attention by the forward mast, going down with his ship. The Bismarck disappeared beneath the waves at 10:40. Of the 2,221 crew members, only 114 were rescued from the water because a submarine threat forced the British ships to leave the area. On that same day, Adalbert Schneider was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross for sinking the Hood, and in December of that year, Captain Lindemann was posthumously awarded the same honor. After that disaster, the Kriegsmarine gave up using large surface ships in operations in the Atlantic, relying entirely on submarines. On June 8, 1989, the explorer Robert Ballard found the wreck of the Bismarck at a depth of 4,791 meters. By closely examining the integrity of the hull, he confirmed that the British shelling, even at such a short distance, it was not decisive for the sinking of the ship, which actually went down due to the efforts of its own crew to scuttle it. The short and intense combat history of the Kriegsmarine ship Bismarck was a highlight of World War I in Europe, and became one of the most thrilling moments of naval warfare in the 20th century. Did you like this video? Support us on Apoyacy to keep the war room going. Your support is very important for the channel. I'd like to thank everyone who's helping, especially these comrades here who are top-notch. And if you want to buy the books I use to make these videos, the links are right down here. For now, watch these videos I picked out for you. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications. When I post more videos, I'll be here. Thanks again for watching. And a big hug to you from the War Room.